Hi, I'm Pete and welcome to Just a Few Acres Farm. We got a big problem with one of our 990 haybines. When I was doing the very last cutting of hay last year and the very last pass, the chain skipped off of the drive for the rollers here. Now that's not the first time this has happened. Usually what happens is this idler here that keeps tension on the chain is shimmed on both sides, and so you adjust it to make the chain travel right on the sprockets. So that's what I figured that it was, but Dad and I got to looking at it after I was done cutting hay, and it turns out there was a lot more wrong. Let me orient you a little bit. So here's the top roller back here, and the top roller rides on this triangular plate here, and here is the sprocket that runs the roller. Well, this plate pivots on this tube down here so that when you get a big wad of grass coming through, the rollers can separate to let the big wad through. And what it turns out what had happened is this pipe here that the triangular plate pivots on came loose from the other side where it's mounted into this other plate. You can see the globs of weld here. It broke loose and popped back in, and the whole plate shifted forward and brought this sprocket out of alignment with this sprocket and skipped the chain, and the whole thing went kerflooey. YouTube is an amazing thing. In fact, I can time travel on YouTube. I decided to travel back from the end of the video back here to the very beginning to show you how a haybine works, just in general, so you can all have sort of orientation to what we're up to. Here's my little 30-second description. So the cutting edge of a haybine is like a whole bunch of scissors in a row. It's just a sickle bar, just like old-time sickle bar mowers. And that's what they look like. They just go back and forth and they cut the grass. And then there's this thing called the reel, and it rotates in this direction and it pulls the grass in over that cutter bar so that it cuts nice and clean. And after the cutter bar cuts the grass, it continues to pull the grass into these rollers, and these rollers crimp the stalks. They make little perforations in the stalks so that the moisture in the stalks can dry out more quickly, and everything gets pitched out the back into a windrow. That's it. The first option for repairing it that came to mind was pulling the top roller again, but we're going to try something a little more surgical, I guess. And that is to free up the tension on this plate, release this spring so we can get at that tube and push it out the other side. We'll see. First we're going to take the tension off this spring that holds the rollers together. Same with the spring on the other side. Take all the tension off. Then we got to take the tension off of this idler sprocket here so it can come off. Should just slide right off. The chain off. Then this hole here on the other side where the pipe comes through, the pivot pipe, has been welded up and the hole's closed up, so we want to fix it so the pipe comes through a little bit to get a better weld. So we're going to have to clean up the edges of that hole with a torch. The next thing to do is disconnect this bracket here so this whole plate can slide back to where it's supposed to be. There we go. So now this should slide back with a little persuasion. It's probably bound up where it's hitting it up there. What is... yeah, maybe. That's just... it should be all loose now, except it's just stuck up there. Alright, that loosened it up some. There it comes. Yep. See if we can pull this pin out and push the pipe through the other side. Oh, that's nice and loose now. Everything's hot. Watch your hands. There we go. Now, can you see where it's binding?
Yeah,
where's it binding here? See, it's hitting right there at 7 o'clock, but
how about right up in that
I can't
right
see in there. Oh, try it again.
if you can get towards the front where the...
Yeah, I alternated it once. Let's see. There it goes. There. Here's the pipe that came out. It's got a groove around it to hold grease, but there's enough play in there where we don't need to duplicate that. We just need to make a longer pipe and weld it in. Cut a new one a little longer out of solid stock because that's what we had laying around. Cotter pin hole in it. See if it fits. Just needs a little bit of persuasion. That's about where we need to be. And once we straighten it out, we got plenty to weld to on that side. Now that this is in and this is plumbed up, we can see we're out of alignment here. See, this plate should sit right on top of that shim there. And the sprocket is also out of alignment here. So in order to get that end in alignment, we can push the roller over here. There's play on the shaft here, or room on the shaft to do that. Loosen up this eccentric that holds the bearing in place and then pull the whole thing this way. Here's the bearing that's on the end of this roller, and these kinds of bearings are quite common in agricultural applications. This is the eccentric, so the bearing is egg-shaped with a fat side and a narrow side, and you put this collar on, and I'm not going to put it on or I won't be able to get it off again, and then you turn the collar. Usually put a drift in the hole here and turn it till it tightens on the fat side of this bearing, and that way you can slide the bearing on the shaft wherever you want it and then lock it in place. Old New Holland baler's got a ton of these kinds of bearings in them. And once you get it where you want it, there's a set screw here. We had to drill this one out because it was stuck. We'll have to put a new bolt in it. Oh, that. I think it's hung up on the shaft on this end. If I had to guess.
You don't want to go in there.
What?
I think that sprocket is in farther now than what the clutch sprocket is in farther.
Oh, so it did come some.
It did.
We loosened up both bearings on the end of the rollers, and then you saw us tapping on either end of the roller and trying to get it pried into plane, and I think we got it. It requires a little final adjustment, but this sprocket is much more aligned with this sprocket. It's got to come this way a little bit still. But most importantly, we got that shoe on the spacer there lined up to where it needs to be there. And we got this square riding in here, so now it's time to weld that new pin that we made up, and then we'll have a plane of rotation that's true for this. Now that the new pin's welded in, we can start putting the linkages back on, and we'll tighten the bearings after we've got everything with tension under it. It needs to go up a little bit. There we go. Okay. Let's set these bearing retainers back in place. We had a little problem on this one. The Allen head stripped out, so had to drill it and tap it for a new set screw. There we go. That just clears those. That's it. Tighten up the other one. That's it. Now I can put the tensioner / idler gear back on. Maybe. Put the rest of our shim washers in here. And tighten these springs back down that hold the rollers together. Wrote the measurement down here. We'll duplicate that. Five and 3/4, right?
Right.
A little bit more. That's good. That's good. Now with tension on everything, we want to make sure everything's in alignment. We got good alignment here, and we got good alignment here. See this plate that rises and falls on this shoe or shim here? That's in good alignment. So now I guess we can start it up and see if it flies apart. That's a good job done. Dad and I were trying to think of some kind of story to tell for the end of the video, and you would think between the two of us we'd have something to talk about. I asked Dad if there were any old implements he worked on that farmers drug over here when I was a kid, and nothing came to mind, huh?
A Minneapolis Moline with somebody put a rear end or the final drive together backwards, and they had a whole bunch of reverses and only one forward, and so we had to take that back apart and put it in. One of the neighbors thought he was a mechanic and put the ring and pinion in backwards. So
yeah,
that was I think that was a G1000 if I remember right. But it was really fast going backwards.
It seemed like you were always welding on stuff that people dragged over and broken this and broken that.
Yeah, I remember one of the neighbors caught a shelf of rock and tore a couple bottoms off a 7 or 8 bottom plow, and we spent most of the night welding it back together so he could go the next day. So that was fun. Not much sleep though.
Well, I think that this is actually the only major repair that I had to get ready for hay season, and grass is behind this year, so you know, usually you try to start looking for a window in early June, but I don't think the grass is going to be there until mid-June. Of course, it always depends on how warm it is, how much rain we get. But anyway, it's good to know we're ready to go when the weather does come. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time. Thank you for